Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard to Compliance Global Inc. live webinar session on US FDA latest strategic priority initiative 2014-2018. My name is Esther and I will be your host for today's session. On behalf of the entire Compliance Global Inc. team, I would like to thank you for being part of today's webinar. Today's webinar session will be presented by John E. Lincoln. Few words about John before we start off with today's session. John is a principal consultant with J.E. Lincoln & Associates, assisting companies in design and implementation of 21 CFR 111, 210, 211, 820, and ISO 13485 quality management system, fully CGMP compliant, and which have passed FDA notified body audits. He compiles 510K submission, new and changed, product risk management files, reports per ISO 14971, design history files, technical files, and design dossier. He assists companies in remediation, FDA responses, SOP writing, audits, validation, software, including software. His work is described in peer-reviewed technical articles and workshops worldwide. John has also managed pilot production, regulatory affairs, product development, design control projects. He has over 32 years of experience, 18 years as a full-time consultant, primarily with medical device industry. Working with startups to Fortune 100 companies, he's a graduate from UCLA. We are privileged to have such a distinguished person like John to present our webinar today. Let me give you a quick outline on today's proceedings. Today's webinar is for duration 90 minutes. John will first take us through webinar highlighting the areas that would be covered in the session and then the main presentation. I would like to inform all attendees that once we begin the teleconference, phone lines will be placed on mute and will remain so until the Q&A begins, which is going to take place towards the end of the webinar session. This is basically to avoid any discontinuity and to make sure participants attending the session benefit from the same. If for any reason you get locked out during the session, please follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we are ready for the session, I would request John to take it further from here. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you all for attending. I'd like to emphasize the Q&A. I will be covering a lot of points on the slides, and I will cover what I consider the key issues. If you feel some issues were glossed over or not covered sufficiently, or raise some additional questions, please use the Q&A feature to address that. If you think of something in the next day or so, please contact me directly through Global Compliance Panel, Compliance Global, and I will happily answer your question, and it will be sent to all of you of general interest. If you think of something months later, contact me through Compliance Global or directly, and I will respond to that individual question. So it's an added benefit of this presentation. Please utilize it. I'd like to emphasize, too, the fact that my background indicates that I've been actively involved in this industry, working with the FDA and with notified bodies overseas to address CGMP issues and similar issues. So what we're talking about here is both what the FDA has published and what I've observed in the field. Those of you that actively follow forums on the internet will appreciate the fact that some of that information is highly accurate. Other information is totally inaccurate, including some from consultants. And sad to say, some of it's way beyond what is usually necessary to satisfy regulatory requirements. So don't get involved in way out in left field information. We're going to focus on some key issues, and those are the key issues you should be looking at in your own quality management systems and your internal company operations. Now, as far as the U.S. FDA is concerned, and the primary focus of this entire webinar is on the U.S. FDA, their strategic priorities, for example, the two reports they published so far. The FDA in the last few years have recognized the globalization of medical products. They recognize that U.S. companies selling in the U.S. and other companies selling to the U.S. and U.S. companies outsourcing from the U.S., bringing in supplies or finished products into the U.S., are doing this on a global basis. As a result of that, they've done a lot of things themselves to modify their operation to recognize the globalization of the supply chain. As a result of that, since 2011, the U.S. has opened 11 new resident posts. They've opened 3 in mainland China, 2 in India, a couple in Latin America, a couple in Europe, one in South Africa, one in the Middle East and North Africa, and these are staffed by U.S. FDA personnel. The one that's in communist China or mainland China have been actively involved in helping the Chinese develop not a clone of the U.S. FDA, but a similar institution to the U.S. FDA, helping them to get out of the reputation they had a few years ago regarding counterfeit products, adulterated products, etc., whether it be medical or FDA-type regulated products or others. Foods have been an issue. That's beyond the scope of our discussion, but that's something that is under the FDA's control as well. So we appreciate the fact that the FDA is not just saying they're interested in globalization and recognize globalization. They're doing something seriously about it. Those of you that get a large portion of your product from overseas or have it manufactured overseas and brought into the U.S. for sale, even though you may be a U.S. company, you will recognize that when the FDA audits you, they will frequently audit your supplier as well through one of these provisions. In addition to the strategic priorities, and incidentally, the FDA is serious about their strategic priorities. You will notice on their website they publish how they meet that each year and how they address it and their areas of focus on it. But in addition to that, there's been other reports that are all kind of interrelated, so that's why I list them and discuss them in this webinar. They published a 510K report in August of 2010 and a summary of action taken in January of 2011. They published a similar report on better science on the same date with a summary of how they intend to implement it again on January 2011. What was interesting about the 510K working report for those of you in devices, but for all of us that deal with the FDA, is it recognized internal inconsistencies in the agency, lack of consistency in definition, like intended use or indications for use, and several other areas showing that, as is true of any large bureaucracy, there's differences of opinion, and sad to say they get expressed in their dealings with industry. And industry has the same issues as well, so nothing new there. But it's just a recognition that sometimes our source of frustration is a result of the bureaucracy that we're dealing with, and that they're dealing with some of our large corporations here. The Case for Quality initiative, again, trying to get back to driving quality back to the beginning as opposed to inspecting quality in. Their wireless device guidance came out a couple of years ago. The UDI labeling final rule and the GUDID database requirements that have a 7-year implementation that already started with Class 3 products in the United States. That's Class 3 as defined by 21 CFR 800 series. Product life cycle, that term is being used more and more in the last few years in guidance documents and other publications coming from the FDA. And then a recognition of where your product is used, the use environment of your product, and trying to human factors engineer out problems or mistake-proof issues so you're not just dealing with labeling to correct problems. You're not just dealing with warnings to correct problems, you're actually dealing with design issues to make problems less likely to occur in the first place. And then, of course, their first strategic priorities initiative from 2011 to 2015, the new one, 2014 to 2018, of course, overlaps and develops upon the first. So we're going to be talking about both of those because the first one hasn't been done away with the second one. It's just the second one has merely expanded on the first. And again, this is not just talking. The FDA is actually doing these things, or many of these things. They are trying to innovate in terms of getting good orphan products to market faster. You saw a little of that recently with some of the problems with Ebola, for example. There's been initiatives in several of the states, which is not under the U.S. FDA, of course, to allow consumption of certain products, of pharmaceuticals, that haven't fully cleared the FDA.